Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Turning Point. We have been exploring with the experts and top CFOs of India Inc. and how are they mapping the reality when everything is uncertain. Moving ahead in this session, we are going to discuss overturning finances digitally. Digitally, just not a tool which makes operations seamless for the companies, but it's actually helping businesses to recover faster and align their business strategy in a far more meaningful manner. Let me explore the same with the best minds that I have today for this session. But before we begin, let me suggest you to please post your suggestions, feedback in the comment box on your right side using a hashtag ETCFO turning point. You can obviously spread a word on the social media. Thank you so much again, once, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start with the speakers that I have today with me. My first speaker is Mr. Raghavendran Swaminathan, the CFO of Wipro Enterprises Limited. Mr. Swaminathan, glad to have you.
Nice to have you, Amol. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. My next speaker is Ms. Mankiran Chowhan, Managing Director, India, SAP Concur. Ms. Chowhan, glad to have you.
Thank you for having us, Amol.
My next speaker is Mr. Vinit Teredesai, the CFO of Mindtre. Mr. Teredesai, glad to have you.
Thank you very much, Amol.
Thank you. My next speaker is Mr. Sibaji Biswas, the CFO of Syngene International Limited. Mr. Biswas, glad to have you.
Nice to be here, Amol. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, each one of you, for joining and taking part into the ETCFO Turning Point. So let me begin with a very important question, which is actually a common question, which I will ask all of you, and then I will get into the specific questions. So this first question, which is very common and broad, is how are finance leaders tackling challenges and leading the transition to a real-time business? And I will shoot this question to you, Mr. Sibaji.
So, Amol, in today's world, particularly with the pandemic and the changing climatic conditions, changing geopolitical conditions, there are a lot of challenges in supply chain. There are a lot of challenges in control, in real-time monitoring of the business, and digital does play a very big role. So most organizations are aspiring to move into a digital mode as soon as possible. We are in different phases of our journey. But it's easier said than done, Amal, because when we get into an accelerated mode of digitization, we realize that there are challenges that come up. I'll name a few of them, and I'm sure others will also add to that. One of the things that I have observed, Amal, is that you cannot have a good digitization journey done without having very good processes in place, right? Because digitization done on inefficient processes is actually more problem than making things easier. So one of the things that we as CFOs really try and do is to do a proper re-engineering of processes to make them simple, make them agile, because agility is the buzzword in today's world, and then move into digitization. And once we do that, digitization actually adds a lot of value by bringing speed, simplicity, and basically adding to the effectiveness of the organization. Right. Other things, in digitization journey, I think it's time to look beyond standard ERPs, and we are now talking about intelligent automation workflows. Different organizations are different phases again, but CFOs are increasingly looking at more holistic operating model, higher level of digitization, low manual intervention, and a broad-based digital control framework. And that, when it comes together, I think organization can be in a much better place.
Thank you, Sibaji, for that note. I will come to you, Vinit. What is your view?
I think so, Mr. Shivaji very nicely laid down the foundation of the overall thing. Digitization is the core of everything that we do. What we have seen in the last 15 months since the pandemic really stuck is that the companies who had digitally strong, who had built-in capabilities to manage their business, whether it's what you can call as an omni-channel experience for your customers, or whether it's connecting with your partners, all those companies were able to actually bounce back very, very strongly. And those were the companies whose businesses were least impacted, and then they were able to bounce back very, very quickly. So I think so the digitization is at core. As a finance leader, obviously, there is a lot of things we internally do. I'll just lay down one example. We have launched a portal called a Supplier 360-degree portal, whereby our entire connect with our partner community now happens through the portal. They don't have to submit those physical invoices. They can upload it. They can see the tracking of those invoices. Where do they stand in the queue in terms of approval, and when they can expect the payments to happen. So that digitization is at the core. The second one, in terms of a real-time basis, also one of the things which we have all started looking at is, you have to look at your balance sheet now. Balance sheet management was probably the financial company's business, but for companies like us also, we have started looking out and managing that balance sheet on a real-time basis, whether it's your extended credit terms, whether it's looking at your locked-in physical assets. 15 months back, everybody was saying that work from home is here to stay for the next couple of years. So let's reduce down your real estate investments. Now, can I make sporadic decisions? Probably I can make very quick decisions as far as I have a real-time data. Earlier, any capex investment or a divestment was a couple of months process. Now it has to become a real-time so that you can manage and look at your liquid assets, what can turn liquid, what can become stale, and how quickly can you manage this. So I think so the technology plays an important part. And secondly is having that information on a real-time basis plays the second part. So that's how I would start with.
Thanks. I think it's a good start, Vinit and Sibaji. Raghav, I would also like you to take that question, and then I will come to you. Mankiran.
Yeah, I would like to put a frame of how we look at digitization fundamentally from our standpoint from Wipro Enterprises. One is, I would say, what I call the core operating activities within the company, right? And for that, we have basically a automation index. What exactly can be manually done? Is it automated or not? And we want to be moving that meter close to 95, 98 kind of a person. I'd probably say we are, somewhere between 40, 50 to 60%. So we want to be able to kind of move that. Then I would say is the next level of decisions, which is more to do with analytics, more to do with decisions which is done by the middle management, but also important that in my mind, I look at it as a reversible decision or not a reversible decision, right? If the decision can be reversed. So where we can use some real-time analytics to come to a decision, but even if you go wrong, you can actually kind of reverse it out. So you kind of bring in a lot more BI or a lot more tools, which basically enable that quick decision making. Third is, of course, the strategic level, which is to do more with, which I don't think is really a digitization play, but it's really choice, which you're basically, the leadership is basically making, this is the way we want to kind of go or don't want to kind of go. Where all this layer actually builds up to a decision, but it's a strategic call which we kind of make at the company level. Now, if you split digitization into two parts, this is within the company, but what are you doing with the customer end? Because the customer end, both on the B2B and the B2C side, is seeing a lot more disruption around customer choices, what they make, what kind of products they like, what is the social listening which we are doing. So a lot of play which is really kind of happening from a digitization standpoint, and you need tools and technology to be able to kind of address it. And the second part is really on the manufacturing and the supply chain side, which I think we need to refer to, which is to really to our own supply stakeholder and how do you really kind of interact with them. Because one of the things digitization needs to help you with is really about seamless movement of goods. And, their technology can actually play, make a major play, especially in a pandemic where disruptions continue to occur either at the customer side. So how quickly that information is relayed, what is actually kind of happening, and whether that process becomes completely seamless or not, and it's not left to some individual to decide what is actually going on. But broadly, when you look at digitization, this is the frame we are basically kind of looking at.
Okay. Thank you, Raghav. So, Mankiran, you heard three CFOs talking, and the major theme somewhere was related to technology. Now, since you come from a technology background, I will spin these questions slightly for you. And the question to you, Mankiran, is how new technologies are overturning finance, and how can it, the new technologies facilitate business change?
I think all three of them have set a really good context. So I'll pick up from where they left. I think we're all talking about a revenue return is expected this year to maybe at least 2019 or pre-2019 levels. And CFOs are certainly drivers or very important stakeholders in a wide variety of critical issues that will drive this post-pandemic recovery. But the chief challenge that we're all trying to meet is how do we accelerate growth for the business? In this digital model, while we get the businesses back into financial health. And CFOs definitely have that function to play, and technology has a function to play there. We're now entering that transformation period for the finance function with new technologies that are available to drive efficiencies, insight into business performances. We spoke about real-time visibility into decision-making, analytics. All of that is becoming, rampantly on the rise, and therefore the finance functions itself will go through a transformation process. And there is certainly a pressure, I think, on the CFOs to accelerate not just the digital enterprise, the pressure to accelerate the enterprise, but also their own function. How do they focus on not just strategic planning, but also developing the skills and talent that is going to be needed for the future of finance, which is fundamentally going to be different than the talent we possessed before. Advanced analytics, AI, ML, cloud, mobile, RPA. I think all of these are established technologies with use cases available in finance. I can see the nod, so I get that confirmation. So if I were to take an example, I think an AI-powered hyper automation is really where the finance is going through, right? Which is really any process that can be automated should be automated, and that's where complementing RPI with AI will become a critical step in evolving the types of tasks being automated. Is it how do we eliminate the rule-based, judgment-based? How do we increase the scope of automation from tasks to more process orchestration? How do we enable finance teams to automate and really orchestrate the end-to-end processes? An example could be a record to report or an order to cash. So there are functional improvements that allow for bandwidth to be freed up for the finance. Some of the best candidates for near-time enablement really are the dynamic processes that require judgment or involve unstructured, volatile data or high-velocity data. In my line of business, of course, that falls in an area of expense processing or invoice processing, where we see where a human judgment is involved, and how you could replace that with AI, embedded machine learning or technology to make those decisions. Ultimately, I think finance organizations are really trying to figure out what the landscape of digital is going to be, and how cost-saving opportunities are used so that there can be more opportunities to allocate the fund for more digital information, digital initiatives. Amol.
Okay, I think some notable thoughts here, Mankiran, and I think just a couple of days back, we had a conversation with CE, Chief Economic Advisor of the government, and he says, what is going to play the major role specifically for a slightly changing financial sector is data and analytics. And he says, even if you look at all the financial crises, any bank who has used data and analytics aggressively, their bad loans are, absolutely at a lower level. So I think the usage of data and analytics has been growing rapidly. And like Vinit, you said, managing the real-time balance sheet is really a trending thing in the CFO's diary today. Let me move ahead with some specific questions, and Raghav, I will bring you here. You mentioned about the customer, the re-engineering and all. So my question to you specifically is, because we had seen a lot of changes in the consumer index and the FMCG sector. So my question to you is, considering you belong to a consumer segment, is overturning finance easy for you, or how is it for your sector now?
No, I think one of the things, one of the filters which I use internally is not to do technology for technology's sake, but really to do for business sake, right? And when you're talking about overturning finance, I think the fundamental thing from a finance standpoint, the biggest charter, and I remember this when we spoke more than 18 months back, in the pandemic, the biggest focus for me as a CFO and the finance team is growth. And how do we really ensure growth in this basically kind of pandemic? So there are 2-3 ways finance is actually reinventing itself. And I would say that's what is really overturning in finance. Is really first is benchmarking with the best. Now, today we are in a technology exercise where we are understanding what is the best route to market, what should the product or salesman should sell, what are the distribution modes which he can go to, and what we can actually, what is the right, number of, he goes in a beat, how many shops he needs to cover, all that we are trying to model through, technology. So historically, maybe, 4, 5 or 2-3 years before, some finance would not be necessarily looking at this particular area in a manner and form which we are basically kind of doing today, because that is the number one business need. And because technology is very aligned with finance, the business leader is coming back and asking the finance side to say, how do I really grow my business? How do I get 10% more sales? So the flip is completely different. As business leaders, they don't really, if you really ask me, no business leader really cares about how you close your books, as long as the books are closed, right? So in my parlance, I would really say that closing books is rework. really kind of think about it. Because it's a postmortem of what has actually kind of happened. So the question really for us from a finance standpoint is, how many resources am I using towards building growth and building profitability versus doing the core finance function? Let me give you another example of how we are looking at overturning finance as in your language. For example, we run a treasury desk based out of India, and we have more than 70 subsidiaries globally in all regions of the world. What we are looking is basically at the press of a button, we understand what bank balances and cash is being moved in each bank account simultaneously in any particular day. And that's where technology can actually kind of play. So you don't need to call up 7 people, and you don't need to kind of check what is actually going on, but you're fundamentally flipped the whole equation to basically say that I've introduced technology to have 2 people manage a more than 6,000 crore kind of a portfolio sitting out here in Bangalore. And that's where the power of, fundamentally kind of technology comes into play. Third is really when you look at the consumer demand part of it, right? And clearly in consumer, we are seeing e-com as the big new channel, and all of you have heard a lot about that. Now, e-com does 2 things. It basically does away with historical distribution, and it has the ability to grow what I call e-com brands. Brands which were not there in the original page, but suddenly you have a brand which is a 100 crore brand because it got into the digital space. Winning in this particular space, you're competing not with the big OEMs, but you're competing with passionate promoters, first-time entrepreneurs who have now a seat at the table because of the digital disruption which has fundamentally happened. So you have to reorient your thinking in terms of how do you really win in this space? And that's where finance is really driving a charter, in terms of what key metrics to look at. How do I really measure whether my e-com business is performing well or not? So I think that in a manner and form is the way we are looking at where finance is basically overturning and reinventing itself from a go-forward basis.
Noted. I think some important metrics. Thanks, Raghav, for sharing that. Vinit, I would like you to give us a perspective. You're considering, the wide arena which the IT companies are following and the business which they have. So, I mean, what are the strategies how you adopted to overturn finances, considering your rupee volatility, possibly delayed payments from the clients, the pricing issues in specifically IT sector?
Very important question, and this has become what I would say is as we say that necessity is the mother of invention. A crisis is also a mother of sometimes making you think differently. As the crisis hit, we had a big exposure to the travel and industry sector, which was the serious impacted one. As an organization, obviously everything came to a standstill in that, and our revenues fell down by almost 50% in one quarter. Now, we launched an initiative called Help and Grow with the customers. We had a pretty solid brands of customer available with us. We went through their entire sort of a 360 degrees kundli, if I want to call it, in terms of assessing how strong their financials are, how strong their company is, what is their forward-looking statement in terms of the digital roadmap. Are they fitting within the company's strategy versus what the company is trying to do? If those, and obviously they were backed by the strong financials or not. After that, we were able to sort of make a very clear-cut decision in terms of which customers, whether I should give them a discount and sort of manage the short-term scenario, and which are the customers whereby probably I need to go and give them extended credit terms because, I'm not worried about these customers defaulting at all. Yes, they are under stress, but the business is so rock solid that they are not going to face this trouble. The second one was more of a active participation on the treasury side of it. So the cash was the king prior to COVID, and it became suddenly an emperor, or you can call it the queen of the crisis. And everybody started ensuring that the cash has to be conserved. So we obviously went into a mechanism of forecasting our cash in a better way. So exactly we knew which are the areas whereby I had to probably put extra efforts and ensure that the money is going to take some time before you can get recovered, versus some of the places whereby our general follow-up was making places. The third thing, we also moved, as you know, that this was the period when the liquidity globally was very, very cheaply available. So everybody of all of us organizations were sitting on a pretty reasonable amount of cash, but it was not yielding any returns because we are a very risk averse companies. The first priority for cash is business. And then we had to move our treasury mindset from being a passive treasury to a little bit of an active treasury. One, as I mentioned earlier, we started forecasting our cash flows in a much better fashion. Number two, we started looking at what are some of the extra steps that we can take in terms of deploying our funds without taking too much risk in a structured fashion and getting a better return than probably what we were doing. That started giving us a little bit on extra edge on the P&L and our margin story. So these were some of the things that we did as a part of this exercise. And if I can just add one more thing, as I mentioned, coming back to my earlier answer, real estate was one of the area whereby a lot of commitments were made with a 5-year, 6-year forward-looking mindset. We took a very, very conscious call in looking at what was not needed and took an immediate hit wherever needed, a small hit, but for a betterment of a longer future, and really consolidated our real estate portfolio and liquid and made that money available back to us.
Okay, thanks, Vinit. I think meaningful one. Sibaji, I think your industry is a bit different. I'm glad that we have participants here from different sectors and segments. Considering your industry, which is specifically into R&D and manufacturing sector, what kind of challenges are you witnessing in terms of overturning your finances? And how are you trying to encounter, that, or how are you trying to overcome that, maybe with your unique thinkings?
See, Amol, one thing that is happening across all industries and is also happening in our industry is data is becoming center of decision making, right? Central point of decision making. So talking from CFO's angle, so one has to really make sense of the data and quickly turn them into effective decisions. So things like deeper data analytics, data visualization tools, using data to create simulations for the leadership to make right decision in a very uncertain environment. That is becoming central to our finance process, and finance business partnering as an organization is really leading that initiative. So in Syngene, that is a big step up that we are doing, understanding data, processing data, and creating data-based decision making. The time for making gut-based decisions are gone, and I think that's one technology shift that we have seen in our leadership thinking and leadership decision making. What is also happening, and this is important to understand, there's almost a data tsunami going on. Everybody is doing their own front-end data application implementation. As a result, we are generating a lot of data. The sales guys are doing, using their application. The data is coming in. The resource planning guy, the project guys, the scientists, the manufacturing guys through MES, they're all generating data. But do they actually go and sit in individual data lakes that don't talk to each other? That's not very efficient, right? So the other role that finance is playing is actually looking at data, creating those connections and see if that is the way to increase and drive efficiency in the organization. Because if you're able to make resource data talk to manufacturing data, one can actually reduce inventory. If we can really make sales data talk effectively with the research data or the manufacturing data, again, the work allocation and the workforce management can be more effective. And I think, being the custodian of the single version of truth, finance has a big role to play, and finance in our organization is playing a catalytic role. But I will also talk about one more thing, which is external to finance and technology development in the life science space, which is having a huge impact on how finance as an organization thinks. Let me explain this. We are a life science organization, and a large part of our job is to really work on drug discovery, novel drugs, which actually help cure diseases, right? If you know about drug discovery, sometimes they take 5 years, 7 years to actually come to a successful drug, and billions of dollars go in. And the whole process, investment and everything has been exactly like that for years and decades together. But what is happening due to fast technology changes now, one can actually do a lot of drug discovery simulation in the computer, right? And it's effectively throwing out a much sharper subset of what one needs to really look at in the laboratories. That is pure technology, march that's happening in that space. Now that has an impact on our deeper impact on how we as an organization have to think about our revenues, the risk attached to our revenue, how we can drive efficiencies, have our revenue model. So the finance organization has to not only do technology changes in its organization, enable better decision making, but also need to understand the technology changes happening in the larger business and really prepare itself for a very different risk reward framework preparation, which I think will completely change the kind of operating model that we will forward in 4 to 5 years.
Noted that, Sibaji. I mean, Mankiran, I have a question, but before that, I want all of you, and start with you, Mankiran, want to give me a comment on the data. Data is a new oil, data is a world war, data is a tsunami. I have been hearing this, but again, at the same time, I'm also listening that data is not organized, and the major challenge for the organization is the data is not organized and they do not know how to use it because A doesn't connect with B and B doesn't connect with C. So, Mankiran, if you want to comment on this is my first question. And my second question is, you mentioned about the work culture, the business transformation, and also the employee behavior. So I want you to tell us, how is it to inculcate a culture while for digital transformation is a challenge for companies, CFOs, and I mean, partly you pointed out that. So in your experience, what are the most effective ways to change the employee behavior and make a great digital transformation at a company level?
I love both the questions, Amol, so thank you for that. And I think, Sibaji, I love the technology march that is happening. It reminded me of the Penguin March, but I will definitely steal that for future. I think data is nothing if not intelligent, integrated. If it's in the silos like Sibaji described, it is actually nothing, right? So the value of data is only what we make of it, which is where the seamlessness, the integration, the intelligence we build on it is everything. So I like you, I've heard data is king, queen, emperor, oil, everything, but I will say data is nothing. I'll go to your second question about employee behavior. I know all of us on the leadership team are talking about employee behavior and how digital transformations changing it has become certainly become a topic of conversation. When you think of digital transformation, digital leaders always tend to think of in terms of technology and business outcomes and process changes and the impact of people. But an area that often gets overlooked is this disruption that that kind of transformation generates for the leadership team, which is the enormous impact that they can have on the success and the failure of how the organization digitally transforms. I think at the beginning, someone said that digital is just a tool, right? I mean, it is not a means to an end. It is nobody's digitalizing just to be digital, just like nobody's transforming just so they can transform. None of us are going to say we're just transforming for the sake of it. Therefore, I think it really begins by the definition and articulating the reason for why the digital change is happening. And that, I think, is to protect against doing digital just for the sake of being digital, or just comparing yourselves to the digital native. I think the objective is really to what are the desired outcomes? How do we optimize for that desired outcome? And what is the route? And if digital is the way to, way to get there. It's certainly, being digital or digital is not the destination. It's what's the outcome that we're trying to influence. I think it starts there. And to get the benefit of the digital business, it's like with everything, it's a very culture first approach to business transformation. Organizational change that really focuses on visible behaviors and outcomes is just not enough anymore. It's about implementing new behaviors, new measurements without addressing the underlying culture is, absolutely counterproductive. So, which is really, even the most well-intentioned people will slip into bad habits or old habits, in times of pressure or uncertainty. And I think we've all been tested against that during the pandemic year as well. Ultimately, I think the culture is really driven by the people's belief in the systems, right? I mean, which is how do we convince the people that the change is necessary? And how do we get them to internalize that belief system is ultimately what will drive the new set of behaviors. There are certain aspects of change or culture which will be slow or fast. It's about, I'm sure, about the framework and communication and new rules of engagement, or just really how do we show leadership or how committed the leadership is. But it's also, I think, as much about putting new behaviors as about stepping back and finding that balance of letting the employees find the space or the employees the ability to shape and practice the new behaviors, which is not really disempowering versus empowering. An area, an area that I speak a lot about with clients is really around the area of employee experience. For a lot of companies, in the pre-pandemic age, the cool cafeteria, the free snacks was what meant employee experience, that drove employee behavior. Whereas now we're talking about hybrid workforces, digital tools to help employees make their life easier. We're not talking about return on investment. We're talking about risk of inaction. How do we impact the productivity of our employees through the intervention of technology, and how does that drive behavior? How does that drive loyalty when employees look at how invested the organizations are, in their own productivity as well?
So Raghav, I will come back to you. I have a question, but before that, all of you, in fact, after Raghav, Vinit also, I want you to add something on data. That what is that you are doing to gain more value out of data in terms of integration and getting a more output. So the question, Raghav, I have specifically for you is what is that the CFOs are most threatened when it comes to overturning finances? Is it adopting or adapting new technologies?
I basically have a simple mantra internally.
Sure.
Is that each finance person has to increase his digital quotient.
Okay.
If they don't do that, they're going to be out of a job in the next 10 years. Really, I mean, if you look at the generation which is coming today, if you don't have a very high understanding of how technology is interacting with business, you fundamentally do not have a place at the table 10 years from now. And it's very, very real as it stands today, right? So first is, I think, finance, the biggest challenge which we typically kind of face from a finance standpoint is, which comes back to the change management, whether it is data, whether it is technology, whether it is implementing a technology as the new technology arises. I think the biggest challenge is, firstly, people don't understand. People don't, technology quotient is low on an average set of people. So if the technology quotient is low, you will not be able to really talk about. That is what fundamentally comes from looking at new technologies, right? Adoption of technologies, always there is a tipping point. And my famous example I basically give is that, till Steve Jobs basically came in and said and made it very, very, very simple to get an iPhone and download the particular music. There was download the music, and he tied up with the music producers to drive that music revenue. So 2-3 events which happened, which basically drove the technology. So what is the biggest learning from that? Technology, adaptation of technology is very, very central to making it very simple. If you make it very complex, the fundamental challenge is that if you already have a technology quotient which is not very good, your ability to adapt that particular technology is going to be very, very difficult from a go forward standpoint. So and what does a person who has a high technology quotient do? He becomes the ambassador to basically say, this is the change which I'm wanting to drive to the organization. And that finance has to be able to kind of do. If they're not able to kind of do that, it's blind leading the blind, and you will always have a challenge in terms of wanting the technology to be able to drive forward. Let me give you one example, which is there from I think it's in some form very remarkable. In the last 18 months of the pandemic, we closed 2 acquisitions, right? Virtually, practically. We must have met the client a couple of times. Okay. Now, the best way to adapt technology is necessity becomes the mother of invention, right? So you have to close the acquisition. So you will figure out ways and means of figuring out how do you really look at that data? How do you get the diligence report? You'll never be, going to visit the site. That's the best driver of, when the tipping point comes, adaptation fundamentally happens far, far simpler. As far as newer technologies question, I think there is a bouquet out there. I wouldn't say don't be in a rush to take on new technologies. Understand what is basically kind of happening. Today, we are driving a big global sales transformation drive. Okay, we are working with some firms. We are trying to understand what is the best way to go to market. But let me tell you, there's so many technologies on the bench there. It is not about understanding what the technology is, but it also in the context of your organization, whether the technology is really going to make sense or does not kind of make sense. So I think it's very important. Adaptation of technology to me is more important than just knowing new technologies or being adapted. That you have to be able to adapt the technology in the context of what you're trying to do. And only then you will see the technology benefit actually kind of arise for the organization. And you can do it in various ways. You can be the ambassador, you can look at solve business areas, you can solve problem areas. So you have to mix and match both of them. And if you don't do that, you will struggle to basically make the technology work for your organization.
Right. So can you quickly also add then how, since you also acquired these two companies, give me some look here on the data as well in the integration part, which I specifically speak. How are you actually believing strongly on data and utilizing it to the next level?
First is I've basically said that the data need not be meshed together. So one of the things I've really done is don't necessarily get all their data in here. Let's first understand what actually kind of is going on from you don't fix something until it is broken. A golden paradigm. You don't come in and say, I want to introduce 5 new technologies there, right? So if they're doing a fantastic job of whatever thing, let us first go and seek and understand what they are fundamentally doing, right? As somebody who's acquired that particular entity, to basically say, what kind of data do we need as a leadership for us to basically review and make decisions, right? The biggest important for me in that whole thing is, and historically Wipro has done that, we don't rush in the 6 months and 8 months. We wait to understand what works, what does not work. This concept of data as the new oil is really coming from technology firms, which Facebook paid 20 billion for WhatsApp. It is that data they're looking at, not because of some internal process data. They're looking at customer data. That is where the data is a new oil. That term got phrased from there. And therefore, now we are trying to apply it across threshold of companies. I'll give you one more interesting example. We have a very intense weekly sales review, very intense. So every Monday morning, 50 pages of sale review is fundamentally kind of happening. Okay, 50 pages. Okay. Every retailer, every distributor, every data is there. And my CEO is actually as good as an IBM computer. Okay. He's very, 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 very quick at it. Now, the first thing I go and tell him, I want to convert the data. He says, firstly, people should know how to use that particular data. I'm used to seeing this manual spreadsheet.
Right.
So I would say my key takeaway around data is whatever you're doing, the change management of how people should look at their data, that's a huge steep climb. Make sure that you're having the right evangelizers, the right change managers to be able to make that transition. It's very difficult. It's very difficult for an individual to change. For an organization, it takes a lot more time.
So Vinit, you heard, all of them. Sibaji is the one who actually started the data war. Okay. Then Mankiran called it data is nothing if it's not intelligent or if it's not integrated. And now Raghav is saying, you don't need to break it unless, you have to fix it if it's broken, right? And gave a great example of how they did use it. So first, I want you to give us your perspective on the data. How are you using data integration and all? And apart from that, the other question I have is, managing short-term liquidity and cost recovery is crucial for every CFO. So what is your suggestion in terms of how CFOs can look at uncertainty in building a future-proof balance sheet here?
So I don't think so. I will have any other intelligent answer to what data means. I think so. Enough has been said about it. Let me be very honest with you, and I'm sure my co-panelist also will be having similar experiences. At the end of the day, as the organizations become bigger and complex, with all this remote working, we all sitting in at our homes and doing the work, at the end of the day, our span of attention is definitely reducing. So it is having an inverse relationship to the business typically having. So the only thing that data does for you is simple data doesn't help anyone. The only things that helps you is the analytical data around it. Data needs to give you an measurement of your vital parameters in terms of how your business is doing well and which are the areas probably, sometimes we get blindfolded by the fact that, my business is growing, profit is managing, and one sudden day you will see that one small area which probably was not as a part of your attention has suddenly become a bigger problem. And remember, it's in organizations of this size, this whole concept of variable cost or a variable management doesn't work. You can't just go tomorrow and say, okay, I'll cut down this cost and stop everything. Yeah, it's nice in theory. In reality, it doesn't happen that way. So you need to plan. Number two, even if for a minute you can do this, you also need to understand there are a lot of repercussions. You can't take short-term decisions. Our decisions are for a long-term context of building a rock solid organization of 10 years from now, 15 years from now. So you have to look at data which tells you smartly what are the areas you should look into. Good times, bad times, some vital parameters are key to it, and they should not be ignored even if they start showing even a small amount of stress. You should be, those should be your learning points and tipping points to tell you that go ahead and look in much more deeper into detail. So that, I would say, is my whole take on data. Otherwise data as simple has no meaning. Everybody has own ways of it. And if you don't do this analytics, you create perceptions in the organization, which, whereby everybody has their own version of truth. And instead of analyzing that data and making sense out of it, you will start managing perceptions, and it's like fighting a short-term fire and getting nothing out of it. So that's how I would put on data. In terms of, as I said, on the liquidity, I don't think so. There is a perfect answer for being future proof. I think so. Different sets of situations needs a different set of example. I'll just take an example between two of my past, one the current organization and my past organization. Very simple thing is, my past organization was a brand new organization which sort of came as a part of a demerger. It started on a very nimble liquidity position. At that point of time, generating cash was very, very important. So we adopted to going and setting up different credit lines whereby we were able to discount our invoices. Now, what happened as a result of that was that we were able to increase our liquidity substantially, but we also increased our cost because there was a finance cost to it. The money came in, but it came at a cost. Now, the same principle I don't need to adopt in my current organization because we are a very rock solid organization whereby my working capital is working well, my collections are happening well in time. Now, my DSO is at 57 days. Do I need to go and collect some more cash and incur additional cost? Or should I continue with the way and ensure that my DSO stays within that comfortable range? Now, the real challenge where I see is how do you ensure that your entire cycle is being aligned to that. So, for example, many of our customers keep on asking for extended credit terms. They're saying, I'll pay you in probably more than 100 days. Now, in those cases, how do we ensure that your other ecosystem that works around you is also aligned to the same sort of working capital requirements? So if I have a subcontractors, do I have a credit terms of 30 days? Then I'm always going to be at a negative cash, because the customer will pay me in 100 days. I will pay the other people in 30 days. So you have to ensure that your ecosystem is also aligned along with this changing terms and conditions. You should not be looking at this only in a one way. And every company has to take a call in terms of, what suits them, what doesn't suit them. Mindtre does it something well. Okay, let's blindly adopt it and in my company and make it happen. Doesn't make sense. You have to look at your own business requirements and take some clues from what the good practices in the other companies are. As Raghav rightly said, it's not necessary when you do an integration of an acquisition. It's not necessary to assume that we are superior and they are inferior. They might be doing 10 things which are far better and far more agile and nimble than probably a big organization like you might be doing. So it's always good to learn, adapt, and then take a strategic decision when you want to make that change happen.
Noted your points, Vinit. Sibaji, I have again a question specifically to digital. And my question to you, Sibaji, if you could give your perspective here is, what can CFOs do to expedite the digitalization process?
As we kind of continuously digitize more and more, the ultimate objective is to make the system more effective, more efficient, squeeze out that additional efficiency and productivity out of the setup. Many times when this kind of technology changes are happening, it's very difficult to objectively define, quantify the benefits, right? And in our traditional decision-making model, it's very difficult to justify if you don't quantify benefits. So I think CFOs have this need in today's changing world to have a more agile approach towards decision making when it comes to digital investments. Sometimes the productivity improvement or the efficiency improvement can be articulated, but the monetization of that cannot be immediately articulated. And that is a risk one has to learn to live with and becomes a part of the portfolio of activities that the CFO has to carry. There's another aspect, it's not easy to transform. There are risks always attached to it. And most CFOs carry the risk management portfolio along other things, right? So understanding the risk of transformation and having mitigation actions in place is another way I think CFOs can accelerate the data journey. One is by making flexible decisions, ability to carry some amount of risk, and also by mitigating risk.
Okay. Mankiran, I want you also to add here because I'm sure you must be talking to a lot of CFOs, and you must have got some perspective from them. So what is your observation here in terms of adopting digitalization? What can CFOs do to expedite their digitalization progress?
It's a great question, Amol, and I think Sibaji said it really nicely. I think I will refer to my background with Gartner and use data since we are talking about data. So nearly 70% of boards have accelerated investment in digital, digital technology, and IT and technology is seeing a 7% increase in budgets. Those are the facts. Those are the data points that we have, right? And obviously, like Sibaji said, the organizations are doing investments in digital because there is an expectation to see more, improve net profit, or how do we reduce the operating cost, or how do we get new segments of customers is why all this investment is happening. From a CFO perspective, I think there are clearly 3 or 4 high priority areas, from the role of the CFO's perspective. One, I think the first one is to ensure that the organization realizes the benefit of their digital transformation initiatives, right? Because all digital initiatives are not created equally. Therefore, before we begin that acceleration of digital just for the sake of digital, it's understanding what is strategic to the business outcome and what are the outcomes that are expected by the leverage of digital technology, because that's ultimately where the digital spend will get decided, right? A way to help achieve the result. I think the second is really about playing a role in setting that ambition. CFOs aren't no longer sitting on the sidelines being the CEO's advocate. There was this discussion of honeymoon period that the COVID has prevented all the leadership team coming together to make decisions in a timely fashion, in a real-time fashion. And I think the role for the CFO also in helping set that digital ambition, that digital strategy, the digital expectation for the organizations become important. And I think there's a difference if you think about whether it's about transformation, digital transformation, or digital optimization. And digital optimization is about how do you apply new technologies to get existing business to work better, whereas transformation is how do we get a completely new revenue stream or completely new business model. And I think that distinction's more clearer for the CFOs, and therefore how do they bring that into the business is important. I think therefore also really important to look at I think finally how do we get the CFOs to remove barriers which enable digital? So once you've identified what the optimization is, what the transformation is, you've been a part of that setting of the ambition, how does the CFO then become a part, put that hat of an enabler and removing the barriers? In most cases, it's access to funding, right? So committing to removing barriers will mean about how do you ease the portfolio requirements? How do you look at ROI or payback periods or just the profitability? So I think those are some tactical, some specific areas, not tactical, but strategic areas where the CFOs can help expedite that role of technology or role of digitalization in the organizations.
Okay. Yes, please, Raghav, go ahead.
2 things, yeah. Personally, for me, I've experienced it. One is you must know technology better than your CIO. So you have to be a tech evangelist. So if you don't delegate the job to the CIO, because he will talk something, but you have to be as good or better than him. Number 1. Number 2, you have to simplify the narrative to the board. Extremely simple. You cannot complicate it. Whatever may be the other complexities behind transformation, they don't understand that. You have to absolutely make it simple that this is exactly the 5 things I'm planning to do, which is absolutely clear to them. And if they get that first 5 sentences, they will say, go ahead. But if you confuse them with some new technology, which is coming here, there, everywhere, you will struggle to close that narrative because they will say, there are multiple questions. So personally, I spend a lot of time now just reading up tech stuff. I just do that personally all the time. So anybody is throwing something at a cloud computing solution or a DMS solution or a software solution, Salesforce.com solution, whatever it is. I make my sure I do my homework. I spend that time, understand what actually is going on before I call the technology guys into it. Because the technology guy, it's great if he has a business narrative, but most often than not, they may struggle with it. May not have as much as a CFO does. So
Right.
CFO has to be that bridge between the technology guy and the business. And for that, you need to understand technology. You understand business, I assume. So you have to understand technology as well.
Absolutely agree with Raghav. And at the beginning I said, I think that's the role of finance is shifting and the skills needed for the finance is different. I think this is such a great example. It's no longer about the technology that's underlying, but the impact that technology is going to do, right? I mean, honestly, who cares what the Fitbit works on, but what does it do for me and how does it help me make decisions is really what's important. And you're absolutely right. I think that's exactly the future of finance and the reskill of employees and beginning with ourselves, beginning with ourselves. What a great
I used to get anxiety before the board. Some technology, and I said, "Mereko padne ka hai," and I have to read a lot about it. What exactly does that mean? So I spend maximum time in technology, not on the balance sheet. I just spend, if I'm doing the balance sheet, I know anyway. So technology. But yes.
I think meaningful thoughts, Raghav. I think is that the reason that most of the CFOs are also getting additional charge of IT and technology in their companies. I think that's what is happening. But I think on a simplicity part, Raghav, you mentioned, you hit the nail. I think that's a very, very valid point, not only for CFOs, for everybody. And I think I remember a great quote of, the Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who said once that I don't understand, the repo rates and reverse repo much, but Raghuram Rajan comes to me only with 4 slides. Every time he comes to me, he doesn't have more than 3 to 4 slides. And that was a remarkable, the analysis the Prime Minister did of the former governor of RBI. I think that's how the simplicity we should bring it to. I think the watch is ticking, but I will still take a liberty and ask one question to each one of you. And that question is based on the theme of the event, which is the turning point. And Mankiran, I will start with you. The question is, what is the next turning point that you see in your company, in your sector, going ahead, maybe in 1 or 2 years?
Amol, I think for our industry and for technology, we've spoken a lot about the technology. The CFO is becoming the technology evangelist, accelerating of digital. The honeymoon period of how decisions were done for digital becoming the new normal, I think is what I see as the future of the next few years. In my world.
Okay, Vinit.
The couple of years back, there was a transition of jobs from the developed countries to the countries like India was mainly on cost reasons. Now, I think India itself has to reinvent itself to understand because these jobs will be done by machines, and that's taken for granted. The high volume, low risk, repetitive jobs are going to be done by machines. We are now even talking about the next wave whereby even the coding will be done by machines. You don't need to think about. So we have an entire set of what you can call software community whose job profiles are at some point of time going to come and rest. And the third part is, I think there will be a lot of new technologies which will become like a bread and butter and very easy to implement. Like I will take an example of blockchain technology. I do believe 6 years back I was doing some study on it. That point of time the potential it thrown was huge, but the capital intensity of it was equally bad. So for anyone to do anything was like a 6 years project with no assurity of returns. Now it has become like a service. You can easily integrate your tools and systems and make it easily available, which means it is going to make equally processes are going to become so automated that with one entry, everything is the whole loop is going to get completed through. So I do believe some of these trends are going to become a reality. If we are not going to improve our digitalization aspect of it, we as an organization may become completely meaningless over a period of time. So it is a need of the hour.
Okay, Sibaji.
Going forward, I think CFOs have to be part of every solution. And in today's world, you cannot think of a solution which is not deeply entrenched in technology and digitization, right? So it's very important that CFOs are an integral part of the digitization process, actually leading that. And the board and the CEO actually expects the CEO to come forward with technology-driven solutions. That's one point. The other point is that let's accept it. Our business environment is increasingly becoming uncertain, and there is more and more expectation that we are in a position to simulate the environment and have measures put in place to handle the risk attached to it. So, there is a parlance called digital twin in the engineering parlance, right? Engineering area. If you bring a similar concept back to finance, finance is getting inputs from multiple systems and continuously processing to kind of digitally simulate and see what can happen if this happens. I think that is another big change that will be driven in the finance. So essentially part of the solution and handle the risk and uncertainty, and both done through effective digital means.
Okay, noted your point, Sibaji. Raghav, your thoughts on Turning Point?
So, historically, as we have seen finance leaders, those jobs will go away. I would say 50-60% of our jobs in finance as we do today. And it's what I have seen is very varied by each country. I think the developed countries are significantly already ahead in terms of what a finance person actually does. They started with the whole offshoring wave, and now they're bringing in technology to basically kind of drive that. I'll give you an example of why I say this. Do you know who is the number one user, biggest country in the world which is using robots today? It's China. And number two, China's cost actually now is only about 1.4 times an average US workers cost. That's the kind of, it used to be significantly lower, and therefore the cost has fundamentally come down. Cost has basically gone up, right? A payback in the US for a robot to be installed is less than 1 year, 6-8 months. One robot, $50,000-$60,000 per annum, it's fundamentally changed. So from an India point specifically, the moment the per capita GDP and the wages actually go up, it will drive acceleration. And because fundamentally the economics of it will justify that these jobs should be done by finance. It should be done by a machine, or it should be done by, and that's the tipping point. That's the adaptation which will basically kind of happen, because our per capita GDP is still fairly low compared to if you look at any of the other countries. So when that basically happens, you will see a huge acceleration which will happen. So what does finance do? How do they believe transformation? And I actually told that in the previous segment, the previous question itself. You have to be a generalist, not a specialist. If you want to understand, you need to understand the intersection of technology, business, and function. All the three, you need to be a generalist. So people call you because you can explain that narrative and impact them. Most of my time today with my CEOs is spent not so much on finance, but most in terms of what technology disruption is happening and what you can do. So you need to basically become a generalist. Not to say that there are no specialized roles, they will be there. But for you to be a generalist, you need to understand all these three very well and be personally very, very well read about all basically what is happening. Because knowledge fundamentally has got democratized already in the world. 95% of all knowledge is already available in the internet. Nobody needs to be an expert on anybody. You and I can get into a discussion within 24 hours. We can actually make a presentation how to fly a rocket. So I'm saying, if knowledge has got democratized, then fundamentally the only value you bring to the table is connecting all these dots together. That's going to be a small set of people, and you should make sure that you're one of them.
That was really meaningful, Raghav, and I think all of you shared really valuable thoughts, not just on the topic, but also the next turning point that you see. I think that's a wrap from my side. I'm sure the participants and the delegates who are attending the show must have enjoyed the perspective, the observations, and the realistic case studies that you offered. So thank you so much, Raghavendra. Thank you so much, Sibaji. Thank you so much, Vinit. And thank you so much, Mankiran, for sharing the most valuable thoughts at ETCFO Turning Point. Thank you so much. Stay connected and see you very soon, maybe offline, physically for the next event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amol.
Thank you,
everybody.
Amol. Thank you.